Welcome, and you're listening to The Weed Out. I'm Spencer Fox Peterson,
And I'm Joanna May Booty.
and we're here to talk about all the issues that matter to us abolitionists and people who are abolitionist curious. We're here to weed out the ghouls and dive through the problems in our local communities. What happens here is likely happening in your backyard. We've talked about propaganda, police brutality, how the political realm is co-opted and or bullied by the local police and also gives them cover. Today we're going to be discussing the prison industrial complex. It's a complicated but yet simple system. It's for profit and it's about caging people. And this is people prior to conviction, post-conviction, how it involves bail reform, how it breaks up families, carries on the systemic issues in our country, doesn't actually focus on rehabilitation, and at the end of the day, treats these individuals that are caught up in the system or inmates for whatever reason and stuck there, usually not rich people, and how they are coerced into unfair labor practices, inhumane living conditions, and ultimately it's not for their betterment, and it's I call it torture for profit, and it feels like a big problem that's far away from us, but your local police and your local policies and laws and the federal ones all are working hand in hand with these systems of oppression. So, think about it. Back in the day, it was a crime to be accused of being a witch. What does that mean? What is it? What does that mean? So obviously they didn't have prison industrial complex back then. They just had, executions, which is not good either.
No.
Then we had the slave system. And then when the slave system went away, a compromise during Reconstruction was if you're arrested and found as a felon, you're not protected from slave labor. And that's in the actual Constitution.
That's the
13th Amendment,
correct?
I believe.
Yes, and we'll
13th and the 14th. But
it basically legalizes it at the level of it.
And what does it mean to be a felon? That again,
right.
At some point, it was a crime to be a witch. It was a crime to possess marijuana. It was a crime to run alcohol. Prohibition was the thing that would have, and this is how they strip people of voting rights. Mm-hmm. We at the Weed Out are a firm believer that even if you are convicted of a crime, and doesn't matter, you still have a say. It doesn't matter what the crime was, whether I find them heinous or not. You shouldn't be stripping people of that right and putting them behind a paywall. And again, this only benefits, rich people. They can usually get their voting rights back. Anyway, so that's my ramble. And you're Joanna May Booty. Hey, nice to see you, bud.
Hi. It's always good to see you too. You're right. I think like most institutions in the United States, the prison industrial complex focuses on punitive actions and specifically incarcerating people, human beings in cages. Our news and our media focuses on rising crime narratives, even when it's not even the case, just to keep people feeling unsafe and okay with these types of systems. And when someone does something illegal, like you said, it's the norm for us to just think, okay, well, they should be punished. And that oftentimes could include spending time in jail. And
that's where the thought stops. It doesn't think about what that may actually be like. But it does, because how often in pop culture or in everyday conversation do we make jokes about don't drop the soap?
Well, right.
So we know what happens. We know what these places are like.
Or jokes about the food and
or why would people fight and spend so much money to stay out of it?
True. So true. And I'm someone who has been impacted by incarceration at a personal level with a number of family members. But the person who spent the longest time incarcerated was my oldest nephew. He's in his mid-30s now. And recidivism is real. I did as much as I could, and it really was a reason for me to begin focusing on abolition just at the prison industrial complex level at around age 22 to 25. I didn't know exactly what abolition was then or what I was doing, but I didn't want anyone in cages once I saw the conditions, or even just saw how things were handled. Just like people who can't pay cash bail after an arrest are part of the population in the United States that holds in a prison. And these are people who have not even had their day in court yet. So like that alone is just, if we didn't as a family get the money to get him out on bail or whatever, I know you might still get time served once your case comes up, but those are people like the perfect example, which Spencer has a little more, like, a little bit more information about Rikers in New York City. I think they hold an incredible amount of individuals.
More people are being held there pre-trial than not.
Which is
and it's overcrowded and
ridiculous.
They had 17 deaths this year due to negligence, essentially.
It's just cruel, and I think
I want to rebut any automatic knee-jerk criticism that has been programmed into our thought process as Americans. Just because Joanna's family members are accused and convicted of committing a crime, and they could have done something heinous, right? Without getting into detail, let's just even go to the extreme: committed a murder.
Right, and he did not. Just to put that out there, like it was a nonviolent crime.
And it's not to say that it doesn't excuse the actions of people that harm others and do things in a way, we could talk about the motivations of why people do these things, but the harm happened. So how does caging them and abusing them and dehumanizing them and putting them in a for-profit, like grossly for-profit program that props up our capitalist economy, how is that fair? Or how is that going to rehabilitate, or how does that make you feel better? It doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel worse. It's like this person did something atrocious, something awful potentially, and most people didn't do something violent.
Right, like we just said,
most of these crimes are not violent crimes.
Right.
Like literally a lot. It's well over 50% of the people in jail. It's probably closer to 75% of the people in jail. I might even be being liberal on this. Aren't there for violent reasons.
Honestly, it's
usually addiction.
I will share
or complications of addiction.
No, yes, I will share the amount of people that are there for violent. It's much lower than nonviolent crimes, and like you just pointed out,
but even then, the people that are some of these violent crimes are stemmed by other issues.
Totally, but like even the people that are there for nonviolent crimes, oftentimes it's people like the part of that population are people who have allegedly done something.
Most of these people in there aren't sociopaths. That's what we're getting.
Yeah, they're just like your neighbor potentially who got in trouble one time and couldn't afford to pay his bail because he didn't have enough money.
That's not the exception. The exception of, just the other rebut is, not only is most people that are in jail, are they not awful people? They just did awful things, and it's not to gloss over that, but also define what a crime is. We change that definition all the time, and I'll just go to the grave on this and tell me how locking somebody up behind a wall solves literally anything.
I mean, you're completely right, and I agree with you. And the thing is,
if they need to be exiled from the community, that's a different story. Hey, you harmed somebody in this community, you cannot be here anymore. I'm not saying they should be allowed everywhere still.
Right.
But putting them in a box and throwing them away doesn't seem helpful.
Well, I agree completely. And I'm going to share some links on theweedout.com to alternative types of rehabilitative structures and institutions in other countries where, yes, they would still be, I guess, as you're saying it, locked away. But they're literally given... It's more like a dorm room, and they're treated like human beings. They have
they can go to bed when they want to go to bed.
Yeah, well, they have a structured day, but it's with therapists, doctors, maybe their lawyer, and then they choose different activities where they can either learn or become part of society again in a positive way. It's not for obviously there are people who may be murderers where that's where they stay, but they still are treated like human beings with lots of support and care, and the place that they're staying isn't so disgusting that they're I don't know. I just the fact that you'd want the eye for an eye thing, I'm sorry, but it does leave the whole world blind. It's such a stupid cliche thing to say, but like, wow. I mean, and just take a look at the scale and uniqueness of the United States mass incarceration. Like, it, so in the U.S., we have 5% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's people
who are incarcerated.
Are incarcerated here in the United States. Exactly.
Yeah. So 20%, what she's saying is 20% of the world's incarcerated peoples all over the world are in a country that's only responsible for 5% of the world's total population. That disparity, and then just remember, next time you hear somebody say we're a free country, we are not a free country.
We are not a free country
at all. We live in a neo-feudal state where if you have money, you can pay to play. And that's not making a boogeyman. That's not some conspiracy theory. That just is how it works.
Oh, yeah.
And then we can talk about people that have done things, groups of people, politicians, movements have done things to play this system. You know, we have, when people say like, oh, the concentration camps will never happen again, it's like, well, we have that. It's more, we found a way to make it more palatable. Mm-hmm. And it's not as direct. Well, but ultimately it ends in disrupting families. Disrupting communities.
It lowers your life expectancy.
It lowers your direct
your
life
relatives
expectancy.
Too.
It's harder. It's just, it does have the effects of a genocide.
Well, and I will share these,
especially when it's very clear by the data that
right, exactly.
It
That's what I'll share.
disproportionately affects certain groups.
Totally.
And it's a way to gentrify neighborhoods. It's a way to clear out the space. I mean, calling somebody a savage was the way to get rid of the indigenous people. Labeling what they did as savagery, and they needed to be punished for it. And they needed to be put in schools and camps.
Too.
And, yeah, exactly. And that we moved the target, you know, generation to generation. Then it was drugs.
Well, yeah, and that's still a big one.
I mean, that's because it works. It works. I mean, as far as
I know.
Because who does drugs? Counterculture people on their fucking last dollar, people who have been stressed out their whole life because their parents were stressed out too. I mean, that's who does drugs and can't afford to buy themselves out of it, you know, to get better. Don't even have that as an option.
Right.
And this is about access, and ultimately what it leads to is people being put into the system, which then has an arm called the prison industrial complex, and it's just as scary as the military industrial complex. They have these contracts. Counties and states make promises in these contracts that there'll be 90% occupancy rate. Or then you have to pay a fine or fee. So it's easier to find people to arrest. So when you hear about, you know, points of emphasis laws, that should raise your hackles up. Like here in Massachusetts, we had recently this thing called Charlie's Law. It didn't get passed in this session, but it could go through the next session. And basically it's an anti-live streaming. You
can't record yourself.
It's an added penalty, and
while driving?
And it's trying to make it different. So it's this really insidious like Trojan horse of bill, because what ends up happening is it has a good intention.
I feel bad, to giggle.
But we already have a law about distracted driving.
On, like a child that so something may have happened. But I
mean
don't to be crass
thing,
about things at
but
all.
It plays into the industrial complex. So when you see these reactionary laws and policies and or, you know, points of emphasis, it's because they're not hitting their promise like quotas, and the courts get a kickback for this. This is how the system pays for itself.
Oh, I mean, it doesn't even though, like, I don't even mean to cut you off.
And then it's subsidized by our tax dollars.
Well, yeah, so like our tax dollars, this should be alarming for people because people are profiting. You're completely right. Mostly corporations or individuals themselves, judges, lawyers, etc. But then
they're at least keeping themselves in business with easy work. It's a lot easier to go after poor people. It's a lot less resources. It's like, why is the IRS, for example, outside the box thing? Why do they? This is middle class America. You can understand why does it feel like they target, and not only feel but statistically provable, they target middle class people because it's a lot easier to audit them. It's just cheaper. It's easier. It's less manpower. It's more straightforward.
Totally.
And they're not a power player, so there's nothing they can do about it. They just gotta sit back, take it, do the process. And most of the time it works out fine. Most people get audited and they move on. But then the IRS can say, hey, we did our job. We looked at X amount of cases.
Right. And I know it might not radicalize everyone to hear this, but these numbers do radicalize me because what I think about is eventually after thinking about the prison industrial complex and just everything, like I'll share the data like we always do on our website and the links, but like the U.S. prison system costs taxpayers usually around like $80 billion per year over the course of the last maybe like 2 to 5 years. So that'll go up. And that money could be used in so many other ways to like build up communities, either actually rehabilitate people rather than literally tearing communities apart and just causing more harm. And like we can't go into it now even, but once you really dive into the prison industrial complex and what it does to our neighbors and our communities
and people we don't know and can't see.
Yeah, but
that matters.
It does matter.
The genius of all this is that it gets us numb and it feels like a faraway problem.
Well, and it's I mean, for the public school systems, which I was a part of, and then so many other things where they embed cops shouldn't be in schools for a reason. Children aren't criminals.
When your only tool is to jail people.
But it puts that school to prison pipeline's a real freaking thing because of like all of those. I don't know. It's just, I think eventually I think what I'm trying to say, I guess, is we are at a young age taught that like punitive action and police presence is a normal thing. That like and if someone is doing something illegal or wrong, we should let the police officer in the school handle this kid, and that's just that's just and okay. But that isn't just and okay. It's immoral and unethical, and it costs us money. Those kids probably actually need help, not to go into like juvenile incarceration, which is then a pipeline directly into basically, like you said, torture. I'm sorry if you haven't ever been inside a maximum security prison. I've only been inside to visit. It's fucking horrible.
Just the thing that
it's fucking horrible.
Thing that triggered me, the weird detail about jail, is how they control the lights.
Well, there's all different things too. Every
and the reason
I say
like the minutia is what triggers me is because I am my career has been in food service. Most of the people I've worked with, more people often than not, I've been entangled or imprisoned or something than not. I'm a kid who grew up in a relatively comfortable home that was not expected when I was a little kid. I never thought I'd be around these type of people, but it just worked out in my career choices. I ended up being around a lot of people I've been fucked up by this and had a lot of experience. And so you're sitting there on a Friday night getting your ass kicked on the kitchen line, and you know, after that you talk about just like random shit, and some people will make a joke and then it ties into their time in prison, and they'll be like, yeah, you know. And one thing somebody pointed out that prison was fucked up was, yeah, when they're punishing us, they don't turn the lights off. Or
well, there's like
just imagine like
tactics.
Some people
Totally.
Just baseline the concept of some people don't go to bed at 9:00.
You know how on TV
they're not hamsters, dude.
So you know how on TV they show usually like you get a cell with like a partner.
Yeah.
Not the case in all jails. Where my nephew was in Concord,
which is a good and a bad thing.
But no,
it's like it's a bad thing because you're isolated.
Terrible. No, it sounds terrible.
But
based
like, imagine
on
if they pair you up with some asshole.
No, he said for sleeping, they basically sleep in like a gymnasium sized room.
Oh,
with
I'm sorry.
300 beds.
Yep.
TVs are on all the time.
Like you're at a lodge.
Yeah, but there's no actual downtime. So he said he would sleep in shifts. He said it almost drives you totally insane.
It depends on the prison.
Oh yeah, it does.
It depends on what the facility they have.
Different tactics.
Same reason people say they don't like going to shelters.
It's so scary.
You know, that's the same.
Because you just have
shelters.
Not everyone's safe. Either, not everyone's a safe person. So you lay there afraid all night. Right. And I'm not just thinking about my nephew. I'm thinking like everyone. Like I guess people need to decide what they think they want themselves and especially if you're a parent, your children to carry as values when you think about punitive actions. Like I know rape and murder and some things are upsetting and like they should be addressed, like we've talked about.
Or when they're trying, like the trope of your parent trying to say don't do drugs because you'll end up in jail, and jail's a bad place.
Well, that's
like, you know, like that's how it's not. So don't tell me it's not okay. Out of sight, out of mind.
No, that's not.
We use it as a threat all the time.
But I will say though, in our current society, I can understand why a parent would say it in some ways because you don't want your kid to end up in jail.
It is
too.
About safety.
You know, you don't want your kid to end up in jail.
This is
it's terrible.
Reductionist binary thinking is what, you know, we could write a book on that, and how dangerous it is, but how it is a survival tactic. You know, like people do have to make quick decisions and black and white decisions. But the thing about the prison industrial complex that radicalized me was tying the military industrial complex to it, in the sense that a lot of people who go to jail are ex-military because of drug addiction.
Well, that's the thing.
So
it's
they
so
get
much
hooked.
people with
They
drug
have
addiction.
PTSD. They have all the stuff. They go on treaty. They get neglected after their service or during their service. It doesn't matter. It's a war on the middle class, because it hits you on two fronts. Because if you go into that system,
and the poor especially,
well, I don't even like to call people poor. They're not. They're trying to get by. You know?
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
not
they are
saying this
poor.
in a negative way. I'm just categorizing like how we look at
Working
like
in
how we look at, I guess, like how
It's
the
a two-front
government would
thing.
how the government would look at income.
Or
I'm
like
just
how-
saying those people are most disenfranchised.
Historically, we've used the military as a way out of prison, too.
Oh yeah,
You
you
know,
could go to the military instead of
leverage,
go to jail.
especially
That's a
during
totally
the 60s, you know, that was a big thing. And or you got in any sort of trouble, they would leverage you to go to the military. But then you go to the military. Think about how many Vietnam vets are probably in jail. I mean, there's got to be a number, or have gone to jail, because they get out, they have PTSD,
yeah.
they likely have drug addiction because drugs run in, you know, anyways. But then you get out and the odds of you going to jail are higher because you have all these things that check the list of likely to go into that system. So you can go to the military to avoid prison. You can likely be a higher risk person to go to prison when you get out of the military. It's so fucked up. And and the military is as complicated as I feel. I don't have a problem with the people that are in the military. I have a problem with the, you know, for-profit making weapons to proliferate endlessly.
I have a problem with some of the people in the military. I don't have a
Sure.
problem with those people that were conned into going.
I feel like it's a really
a lot of people are conned into it.
Yeah, they're fed a lie,
Or
and
you
they're
don't
leveraged.
understand what
And
you're
most people in
doing.
the military are over leveraged in life. They are from a marginalized.
It's just like
group.
another form of torture on our
Not the
citizens.
officers. I'm talking about the people that will actually get blown up.
Right.
I'm not. And I know there's probably some decent people that are officers in the military.
Totally. I'm not saying that either.
But like, I don't know how you can be complicit. Personally, it's kind of like the cop thing. The cop thing bothers me more because it's like, you don't even go through the hell that the military people go through. It's a fucking certificate program.
Well, yes.
So like, I'm like with the prison industrial complex, clearly rehabilitation is not the goal. Even they can say it all they want, but it's not happening.
Right. And I think you literally led me up to my next thought, which is like, yes, like this is the one system, just as an example today, the prison industrial complex. It is just not working in our society. And like, we should be able to come up with a new way to address the issues that put people first into the situations where they may become houseless, without food, lack of education, access to healthcare, and before they even become incarcerated. So like prevention should be a big goal.
And that would
harm
be
reduction.
cheaper.
It would be much cheaper. And there are studies, and I'll share some online. And we're going to have to do an entire episode on just like the military industrial complex eventually. But the prison industrial complex itself harms our society so much. And, you know, we've talked about what crime means and who benefits from what. And I think it leads into the profit part. Like, I mean,
We haven't even talked about slave labor yet.
I know.
We haven't even talked about the fact
like there's the profit.
that-
It's so crazy.
there are states like Arizona who are literally admitting, was it the Department of Labor or the Department of
It's the Arizona Department of Corrections Director David Shin. And he said Arizona communities would collapse without cheap prison labor during testimony during the joint legislative budget committee. Like probably, I'm not sure of the date. I will share the link. It's really, we'll just share the write-up. But it's like one example of a state that's basically like when they wanted to look at prison labor and like how much they pay the prisoners. Like this guy came out and was like, yo, like our economy will collapse. And that's
and on top of that,
crazy.
it's not just that the prison labor
Well, it's what
is a
you-
thing. It's the fact that the whole community works at the prison if they're not in the prison doing the prison labor.
Right. So the people.
So those people
Exactly.
would also. So it's like they have found a way to leverage the working class against each other, working and poor class. And this is how the prison industrial complex affects us normies, us people that, Joanna has ties. I have ties, not indirectly because of the job I'm in, but like I'm around a lot of normies in my mid 30s, and I call them normies because it's like they go la di da 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 through the day, and they don't mean they're not bad people.
No,
I think they're good people and face to face, and they're not fascists. They definitely don't. But what they don't see is what they don't see.
Yeah, and I'm not saying anyone's a bad person. So we just need to normalize the fact. Because of that.
We need to normalize talking about the prison industrial complex.
Right.
So that way we can get people to understand how our local police and our local politicians and policies and ordinances fund, fuel, and enable this for-profit housing caging system. Not housing, caging.
Okay,
it literally is cages, and like we need to get to our normie friends, and most normal people would be like, yeah, this. And if you explain how the budget works, where it's like, well, we spent X amount to do torture, when you could spend possibly less, and these billionaires aren't making money in shareholding earnings. See what I'm saying? Like, right. And basically, you want to talk about socialism? Like, that's a way to print money, launder money.
I mean,
the government to these billionaires, like that's these shareholders, these for-profit people. That's socialism.
Right. It's already for the rich. It's happening.
That's literally Nazi Germany shit. Like that is straight up. Hey, we're tight with certain businesses,
and they
can privatize the capital, but we're going to make sure they keep those. That's kind of how this all works. In United States. We can't sit here and say we're the world police. We are the world police and the world criminals. We're the ones that are making most of the guns that are illegal all over the world. Those stats that's just damning. It's like whether they're from our CIA sales, our military sales, getting out from our criminals, or and I mean criminals, not your local gun runner. I mean like the larger. The people that never seem to get arrested by the DEA and ATF that are just still floating around. We don't even know their names, It's like, but the guns and the drugs still flow, right?
It's probably the cops. I'm just saying. I know there's not, but
who knows?
Sometimes it's like, how does there has to be?
It doesn't really matter to me.
I have to cut this.
Everybody. No, and maybe you have to cut it, but to just so the audience understand, it's like, does it at this point? It doesn't really matter. What we're doing doesn't work. So even if you're saying, I don't want murderers on the street, or I don't want even weed dealers on the street. Let's even say let's even say you're a neo-fascist. You're some boomer white lady that just doesn't want dealers on the street. They don't even know what that means. They just don't want that. It's not working.
Right.
It's
right.
like so if that's what you want, you're still not getting what it is. So it's about the cruelty then.
Right.
Because if this process worked, and this is where it's like, as abolitionists or people, working class people, like my job being a food sourcer will never end. People need to eat, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to be a good social worker, therapist, you should be working yourself out of a job. That should be your goal. Maybe so as a police officer, or a law upholder, law enforcement, right. You should be finding ways to end this.
Exactly.
If that means like you have to be like, hey, and there are people inside these law enforcement agencies and bureaucracies that are smart people. They're probably like, hey, if we just invest in education, it's proven to show that crime goes down. But they're drawn out because there's unions and people that are like, yo, we can't lose our day-to-day jobs. And It's like those day-to-day jobs are defunding the community.
Right.
And then on top of it, none of this works. And then there's with the prison industrial complex, which is all feeds into, these guys are just getting buku bucks.
Right, but it does
treating individual inmates like literal stocks.
Yeah, like not human. And the private company involvement is like really insidious. We haven't even talked about the slave labor part, which we will, but the private company part is a part of the prison industrial complex. Even like there are companies that are even overseeing probation at this point. So, and I did not know that. That's wild to me. So you'll just get on probation. That means you're on like basically home. You have certain stipulations depending on your probation. But if you don't make your fees to this particular company, which it's not even at that point, it's the state outsourcing. So like I'm just going to read a quote quick from the Human Rights Watch that states, each year the U.S. courts sentence several 100,000 people to probation and place them under the supervision of for-profit companies for months or years at a time. They then require probationers to pay these companies for their services. Many of the offenders are only guilty of minor traffic violations like speeding or driving without proof of insurance. Others have shoplifted or been cited for public drunkenness or committed other misdemeanor crimes. Many of these offenses carry no real threat of jail time in and of themselves, but say you miss your payment, these probation companies can report back and you could end up actually doing jail time if you like mess up your probation with this for-profit company. So I'll share a link on our website to this, and I would urge people to really read the entire article. And they conducted 75 interviews in different cases and found that often people are doing time in prison for misdemeanors if they cannot literally pay fees to these so it's like you wouldn't have gone to jail. It's like a traffic violation that you would have never gone to jail for, but because they involved a private company and you couldn't pay money, you then end up in prison. That's awful.
For example, think about something that touches everybody every day in every state in this country. Somebody knows somebody that has one of those breathalyzers in their cars.
And even if you don't.
And you're paying a fee to a third party to maintain that. They force you by law to use that. And I get this is where like
that's a safety one. I get it.
No, I don't. But this is how. But I'm trying to give how this works out.
Totally.
A real life example. It's like it's a paywall. It's a gatekeep. It doesn't stop people from driving drunk. It's a way to just keep people. So the future isn't going to be prisons. It's going to be electronic imprisonment.
Well, and they're showing that it's already started.
The investment in the companies that are making the ankle bracelets, they're going to have a quota that they got to meet. Mm-hmm. So then all of a sudden there's going to be emphasis on, I don't know, growing too much marijuana. You know, the state limit is 12 plants and you had 12 and a half. Because you had some cut up and dried in your house, like somehow, you know, stupid things that they'll do like that, right?
It's just, this is so shady to me because the probation companies that take over, they basically just offer the courts, the counties, and the towns. It's a deal too good to be true. It's like, we'll handle everything. You don't have to give us any of your public monies, as long as we get to keep all of the fee profits to handle and handle all the administrative stuff, basically, with the probationers. It's like basically oligarchy. And the entire stream of revenue and profits is just fees from people.
And this is why the weaponry of we want small government. What they're trying to say is we don't want to pay for covering any of that and pay some slacker to move paper. We're going to pay a third party company.
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
that's the dangerous when you hear people say
that is the danger of small government. Exactly.
It's like, well, we should be like, why do we need to outsource making military weapons so that way we're stuck in these contracts we can't get out of?
Our government can make them.
For example, if we must jail people, can we at least compromise on the fact that our jails have to be run ethically and by the standards of the U.S. government?
Right.
That you can sue them for violating your rights.
Right, exactly.
While you're still in their custody. And it's still going to cost us the same at the end of the fucking day.
Like, also just feed them, treat them like human beings, get them a therapist, a doctor. Some people don't have any care, at all. You know,
places like Rikers have more corrections officers than they do have inmates, and they have understaffing issues. It's like, well, maybe if you didn't overcrowd the prison and you actually gave the prisoners access to different kinds of personnel, like, why is the answer for everything a goddamn hammer? I don't understand.
Well, I mean, think about...
Coming from a hammer, from a person that's been accused of being somebody that hammers a point.
Yeah.
I'm bewildered by these people.
I am too.
Because I'm sympathetic to hammers.
Me too. And I guess what I'm trying to hammer home for everyone is, that's why we're doing this and this podcast and this episode today, because when we say normal people or normies, we're not saying that...
It's not derogatory.
It's not derogatory. It's just... We are some people that think about these things or are engaging in looking at these things very often. And we understand that most people may not want to or have the ability to even do that. But if you're listening, please, even just look at the links here. I mean, I don't feel that anyone we know personally would be okay with what the prison industrial complex does to society, and how much, honestly, it's not just the money that we lose, it's the people that are just treated so inhumanely that like we should want more from ourselves in our community. And I mean, that's just a straight up, and like we haven't even, like I said, we're going to have to talk about it still, but like we haven't even talked about the slave labor aspect of prisons
right.
yet.
And how we have this delusion that slavery is abolished in this world, and it's not. It's not even abolished in the United States. It's actually ran and operated by our federal government.
Right, and I didn't always know this. Like I thought, like, oh, that can't, like, we don't have slave labor. And then when I learned about prison work, I was like,
reread that
holy
that
crap
amendment.
Right.
You read it word for word, and it's literally except with the exception for
people who are
held under a felony.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, it's right there.
Yep.
No wonder black people historically, every time we do something and we say it's progressive, they look at us cross-eyed because they've been fucked over so many times. It's like endless fuckery.
It's endless, and I think the most horrifying thing. Okay, so for me, I thought like the slave labor is one of the most horrifying things, and I guess like I have it's an NPR piece. So for our friends out there that feel like, you know, what media are you citing? Is it, you know, Human Rights Watch also I think is very reputable, but NPR, you know, it's kind of like middle of the road. But I think that they did a really good job with the story in Omaha. That was direct quote, just like interviewing people who are incarcerated, individuals who are in the system. And it says, so they're paid, direct quote, they're paid $225 for more than 12 hours of work. After taxes, Dominique says, they would take home about $54 a month, and most of that money went towards paying for things like phone calls, which could cost up to $5 per call, or items from the canteen. And sometimes it's called the commissary, if people have heard that term. And so they'd like a bag, or like a personal-sized bag of Doritos, would be about $5, Dominique says. And they might spend an entire day's work on one stick of deodorant. So I'm just like, that is, like, again, if you have values and care about people, Dominique is an individual person. Like, why would you want them making $225 for 12 hours of work? Why would you want them working 12 hours, first of all?
And if you're housing people, you have to give them
they should
not
have
just a
things
roof.
to do,
No. They shouldn't have to pay at all or out the ass for the things you literally need to live.
Yeah,
like you need to be clean.
Great point, because it says commissary. I found this quote, like it's not a quote, but like data that I can share. This is
why we say it's torture, though.
But it's, yes, because commissary typically sells things that like are just items you need, even for women, like menstruation, like time a month.
Toothpaste.
When I get my period, toothpaste, just food. The food in prison is terrible. I don't know if, again, I've only seen the side where you can buy like vending items, and the prison I was in, the Bush family actually was owner of the vending machines there. The food was awful and disgusting, but the food, my nephew would tell me, in the prison was even worse. But so if you wanted a treat, like commissary would be where he'd want to go. And so like that's usually 5 times or more, and this, I'll share this data, in most prisons. So like you'd have to save up, but depending on the prison too, the price, like I looked at a bunch of stuff before we did this episode, and like I already kind of knew it was different everywhere. And then you brought up a plate, like California's is like $15 an hour for the firefighting at this point now, finally.
It's up there, but that was a Biden thing, and there was a bunch of pushback on it even.
I bet.
Biden,
because it used to be like $1 or $2.
Because they were in federal prisons, so that wasn't...
Right.
There's so much out there, but basically the long and skinny of it is... The long and skinny is that generally if you're forced to work, which most inmates are...
Well, yes, that's the thing. It's also
not
forced.
It's not a fair deal at all. Because you have to pay... We're having debates in progressive Massachusetts if we should let inmates call.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Fuck on, man. It's, $5 a phone call. It's like, and you're making, pennies on the dollar for your slave labor.
That's still sitting in our legislation with our legislators. It's still sitting. And thankfully, California is the one state that has stopped costs for phone calls, but this needs to happen in Mass soon, and I feel like that's something we should push for. But even in California, it's not perfect. Like, it's a very small number. So I think, like, people just need to be aware, like, they're separating families. How rehabilitative is that? Like, it's just, there's so many.
It's like when people are too poor or unable to sustainably raise their kids. We just take the kids from them, spend 3 times as much on the foster care system. I mean, per kid, as opposed to just giving them the money for the food or giving them the food. It's nuts. It's
being
like
poor is being criminalized now. That's horrifying to think about.
The reality is, everybody, less than 6% of this country is a millionaire. All right.
It's such a small
Most of
amount.
us are fucking step or two away, a couple bad steps away, or some of us are less than that. But really, the reality is, you're a car accident, you're a work accident, you're an independent contractor accident away from your life being very different. And, you know, in Massachusetts, we have questions about, should we tax the over millionaire class?
Yes.
And it's like, yeah.
It's like 4%. They'll be fine.
Oh, absolutely.
Y'all
fine.
swaddle yourself
and
for a minute.
It's like so few people, and it's not the businesses. And if you're able to take a salary home of $1 million from your business, you're doing great. Maybe
you're fine.
Maybe you should reinvest that in your employees, and then you can make more money because the employees didn't leave because they got paid better wages than everybody else. Anyways.
Yeah, get out and vote, everyone. If you do vote, the questions are really important.
It's actually really easy. Just think yes on all 4.
Yeah, on all 8 if you get them. There are some that are. So like I would just say yes to all of them personally.
You know, the fun democracy thing where it's they roll it out like
1 out of 8 people for the transparency one. So shady.
It's so fucked up.
It's the weirdest thing.
Don't ever let anybody tell you that Massachusetts is a progressive state.
We are interesting here.
We're the OG. We're the OG. All right.
Neoliberals.
Like, our racism in Eastern Mass, where I'm from, runs so deep that it's because they literally put communities on other sides of rivers, literally, and then that's how it's still managed to this day. It can't be undone. I contend that they're actively hurting us. That's the design. That's the feature, not the bug. Such as the prison industrial complex. I think that's the point. I think it's to perpetuate the problem. It's to keep capital growth going. It's really cut and dry. So like, this is a big topic. So like, what I want to leave everybody with is, remember, you don't have to do what we do and obsess over it. I mean, you don't have to go as far as we do, as far as reading into this. If it overwhelms you, that's completely human.
Totally.
If this is like, wow, these people really are unrelenting on this, and it's because it is dark and it's not that's a hard thing to live with and sit with. So maybe just, you know, your signs of rebellion, it doesn't have to be big grand gestures. You can literally tell your kids, hey man, this is why we're not watching Paw Patrol. You can break it down to any individual in a nice way. Like, you know, you can make dinner conversation like, wow, there's a lot of, you ever notice like every show on CBS that they advertise during football is cop? Why is that? You know, why are people so mad at cop? Like, just ask questions. Do a Tucker Carlson. Just ask some questions. Or even if it's private, just don't watch these shows. Don't give them the clicks. Don't encourage this. Like, we need to change how we view this. It's okay. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, you're going to hear pushback, like in Concord, Massachusetts. If you said, like, we need to abolish prisons, there could be reasonable people, but their literal economy is tied to it because half the people in the town work for the prison and then they shop at the stores.
Right.
So, like, everybody is so, like, the working class people that are rung up in it, whether it's the people that live in the towns that at least get the COs live there, that get paid a decent paycheck. Otherwise, there's nothing out there because whatever. But so there's money in caging humans. That's what you have to realize, and we have to divest ourselves from that, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's a great point, because if our government can control such a heinous system like this, but people want small government, that is not small government. And so I do, like, amazing points, and I think on top of that, if you're someone who wanted a small government, like, you're propping up this system, and this is a giant system, and maybe think about that in general, it's also very cruel. And I would urge people who were CEOs who are afraid to lose their jobs, why can't we, when we come up with new ways of rehabilitating people or keeping people accountable for things within our community, Why can't they have a role in helping people in those ways? Why can't we create jobs by the government that are still paid well with benefits and unions, and they could just move into those positions unarmed and not physically abusing or harming someone?
It's like
I don't think that's a big ask on my end.
Talking to these dudes, this is really trivializing the issues, but like talking to pro-cop people who talk about the job security. What it reminds me of, and y'all cooks and restaurant people know what I'm talking about when I say this, and if not, you should make friends with restaurant people because they have the best stories. But we can, everybody knows this guy. You're working at a restaurant, and all they want to do is like post pictures on their Facebook, Instagram, or like talk shit to the service staff and like be somebody, right? Or just like, I want to be on saute. Like they just, and then they're like, I don't get enough hours. And it's like, well, it's because literally you're always asking when it's time to clean, you're out. So cops, people are worried about your job. Like, what part of this job do you like? If it's like, hey, we could still give you a job. It's just instead of a hammer, you might use a broom and a duster.
Right.
And yeah, you may use that broom as a, sorry, I shouldn't be condoning violence. I was going to say a funny joke about like, yeah, and everything's a weapon anyways. Why do you need a gun? You can use the broom handle to hit somebody if you really need to.
But like they could give people rides to like drive old people to their appointments. Like if you really care about helping the community, I could come up with jobs for you.
Lots of them.
So I'm sure there are wiser people than me. I am not a genius. It's just like
when your only tool is to put them in the prison industrial complex in the court system. That's literally their only tool. Like this isn't hyperbole. That's literally their only tool. So this is to my normie lovelies that I love so much. It's like, guys, this tool doesn't work and it's the only tool we have. We literally need a different tool.
Yeah, and I think
tools. It has to be multifaceted. It can't be one. And the prison tries to make everything one size fits all.
Right. And I want to just say shout out for all our abolitionist listeners here who this is just a one-on-one crash course for you. You already are in it, or you're maybe someone like who has a pen pal who's incarcerated. If you're interested in that, please reach out to us. I'll hook you up with a bunch of different mutual aid outreach programs where you can be a pen pal to an incarcerated person or individual. And mutual aid is also another way to get involved, which would be great. I urge you, the listener, my friends, people I don't know, anyone who has not already come to the realization that prisons are a system that we need to reimagine and abolish, to look within yourself and really think about the sheer number of people being held just because they can't pay bail, just because of money alone, for a nonviolent offense. These are your neighbors and their community members that you should care about. When you're being told crime is rising and you're just supporting the system, I urge you to please just take a look at that and maybe rethink how you align your values and where you put if you're still a voting person, where you put your vote. And if you don't, maybe call some of your legislators and have them change things. But once we tied profit to the system and slave labor, and it's just not an ethical system, and it's been like that from basically the beginning. So I think
this was the compromise and then weaponized.
Right.
So this was a compromise made by, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Democrats made these concessions because that was pre-party switch. But like basically just to give you a gloss overview, like these are all these systems we have are reformed. So slave catching to
it starts
to cops, and
it's a pipeline.
And how these systems, it's all compromising the oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And
sometimes, that was all
that's all you can do. Sometimes.
That's all sometimes in the past that people could do to make things apparently a little better, but there's still a large number and it is a lot better, but there's a large number of our population still in very cruel, dark, scary places. And there's so many things that we could talk about. So I'm just going to share like a link on our webpage at theweedout.com that will like talk. Prison Policy has like a ton of awesome articles, and they have a large number actually pointing out like the ways in which prisons, in sometimes specific prisons, profit off human beings in one way or another. And we didn't even get into, so I'll share the link, but how humans are traded at this point, for money within the system as well, depending on the states.
Like items on a spreadsheet.
Yes.
So the real thing is, it's these systems are so big, and we just need to normalize talking about it. That's what we're aiming for.
Totally.
And what I was getting at with reforms earlier, just want to clarify. is that what I want to clarify about the reforms is in the past, we've made choices thinking this was a way to fix a problem.
Right.
So when people bad faith counteract or just ignorantly say, well, it used to be worse. And it's like, well, that's true. We just found new ways to be bad because we haven't changed the underlying motivation. And that's profit. That's politicization of and trying to keep the working class separated. And you know, it's like that. I think Lyndon Johnson was famous for hot mic saying this to somebody, some reporter, not real literal hot mic, pre hot mic, but basically like convince the poorest white man that they're better than the richest black man, and you don't have to pick the white man's pockets; they'll empty it for you.
I see what you're saying.
So it's like this is all the same. It's in white supremacy has nothing to do with white skin. It's about power structure, and the reforms we've made in the past. Like, you know, when Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich all came together and did the crime bill in 94, right? Some people genuinely fucking thought this will solve the problem. Some people were more craven and nihilistic, sure. But like average people, it's like good intentions get misused all the time. Mm-hmm. So be aware of when people talk to you or try to push back on these ideas and try to say we're crazy agitators. It's like, no, just it's about core value. Is this going to ultimately work? We need to figure out a way that works.
Yeah, and there are, like I said,
it's okay not to have a full plan.
No, and I don't have a full plan, but I have things that I can share because I know sometimes that is a big concern for people.
And progress in the past doesn't negate the reason for progress now.
No. And I will, like I said, I'll share examples for the people who do say, like, what would we do? I'm not mocking you, but there are things. And like I said, I already have like a number of ideas. If you gave me the money that you were using for that system, where I could effectively and hopefully care for people in a way that wasn't treating them that way. I'm sorry. Like there's no reason for a nation who considers themselves to be the greatest or whatever on earth or whatever we consider ourselves, number one, to want anyone to be treated this way. It's really disgusting.
Christians too, no less.
I know, and I do call out Christians, but they love punitive stuff. So I came from a lot.
Well, especially it's not people that look like them, so it's usually fine. But
and I just feel like please join us, like as we wrap up, just please join us in reflecting on why a law is a law, what a moral or a value is attached to a law, why is that happening? And I think, you know...
Why are the headlines being fed to me, the headlines
that
are...
Are you unsafe?
Are you? Or
what's happening in your town?
Okay, cool. Why is when a cop car is taken by some teenagers, it's not about... In the headline, it's about these kids stole a cop car. It's not, how the fuck did the cops lose the control of their cop car?
Well, and
why is a bail reform being brought up as an issue in New York? Like, why is this? And there is actually no data. The data is the opposite. It hasn't led to recidivism.
Yeah.
And they're lying about it. It's like outright lies. So like you do have to be really wary. It's like if you keep seeing stuff about fentanyl,
yeah,
it's because weed is becoming legal, y'all. They need a new
demon.
They need to fill the quota for the prison industrial complex.
Yeah, totally. That's it.
So that's what we're saying when we say, and the reality is we can't reform these institutions and these systems. We literally have to build another system up in conjunction and try to survive them trying to tear it down. And then hopefully create a system that is just genuinely more like attractive. That's the long game here. Like, we're not going to reform this prison industrial complex. We can't undo that. We literally have to like find other systems to take resources away from them somehow.
Right.
Vote against the system.
Yeah, but we're all one step away from being that homeless person. So you need to put yourself, and that's what you need to do when you think of the prison industrial complex too. Homelessness, anything, as a houseless person, as someone who's vulnerable. If you aren't in that position, you're not vulnerable. You're not disabled even. Think of yourself, if this is my last thing, because some people really need to do this. And this is sometimes the only way you'll ever be able to learn it is if it happens to you. But you do not want these things to happen to you.
Or anybody.
Maybe, right, but maybe if the only way you do learn is that way, maybe put yourself in that position, reflect on that, or think if it was your loved one, if it's your son, your daughter, your child, your cousin, your brother, anyone.
And if your answer is like, well, we have the money. Boom.
But wouldn't you want them
like
to receive?
I know,
but that's
and I think
that's a bad
how
value
often do you hear
system
that?
for you to hear.
No, but how often do you hear that?
You need to check yourself if you're
when
that
you
person.
just openly acknowledge how fucked up, unfair the system is.
Generational wealth and privilege when you say that.
People do that shit all the time.
That's awful, though.
Well, yeah, it drags me down, but it's
system.
not going to fuck me up.
I know, but it doesn't... The fact that you'd be okay with anyone receiving the treatment they receive in this system, when we could be using money in better, more just, more ethical ways, is just... I don't know. I just can't understand not wanting to know more. So like I said, I'm going to share links. And there may be many of you that are listening with us that are seasoned abolitionists and you completely agree. And for those of you, thank you so much. And for those of you that aren't, I'm not saying like anything other than please join us. I'm not saying, thank you for being here. I don't have a problem with you at all. I just hope you want to learn more.
Just next time you're like, I need to watch CSI Miami. Like, bro, you're watching propaganda. Please don't. The only propaganda that's appropriate is Reno 911. Because it's literally mocking. It's perfect.
Hard agree.
It's the only time.
Super Troopers is also one of my guilty pleasures.
Kind of, because they make them heroes, and that kind of bothers me. Reno
911,
those people are not heroes.
That's true. They are not.
They
You're
are
right.
not heroes
That's fair.
ever.
It's
Literally
so good.
ever.
It's
Whenever
the
they
best
do
one.
something heroic, it's by mistake.
It's true.
And it's perfect mockery of our system. So Reno 911, I guess, is our like throwback suggestion for the week.
Totally, it is, and it's to keep things light at the end. It is healing.
It makes you feel better, like seeing a cop not be able to shoot from point blank range. Like it makes me laugh. It feels like a stormtrooper in Star Wars, and it's like or just accidentally shooting themselves.
So good.
Anyways, again, thank you for listening to The Weed Out. Remind you, as always, to go to our website if you want to check any of our citations. So we welcome that. And please follow us on our social media. Follow us on the podcaster directory of your choice. Like and leave a review. It helps and get visibility in the algorithms. So we would appreciate that greatly. And have a great day and happy abolitioning.
And take care.